I want to welcome into the program from the Heritage Foundation foreign policy analyst, Dakota Wood. Dakota, always great to have you on. I've got a lot to get to. I want to get right to it. First of all, in the news today, a couple of different things, but mainly they revolve around Hamas and their tunnels. Now, Dakota, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. While you have the Democrats and some of these folks screaming for a ceasefire, talking about wanting to save lives and the number of casualties that are happening right now in Gaza, the reality is that, number one, you do have Hamas continuing to use these folks as human shields. Of course, that leads to a high casualty rate. The other thing is that they have found a Hamas headquarters, if you will, a Hamas hive underneath the hospital, and they've also found weapons in the basement of a school there in Gaza. So talk about what we know today about what is going on in these tunnels.
Well, the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, has basically encircled Gaza City. So from the north down along the sea coastline and then cutting back in toward Israel about midway down. And so that's allowed the forces to gradually kind of constrict this circle, right? They're getting in closer and closer to facilities. And so while they're doing that, they're finding the physical evidence that matches all the other intelligence that they've accumulated over time about these tunnels and where the entrances are at, and they're able to watch Hamas terrorists, exit a tunnel, conduct an attack on Israeli forces, and then duck back into the tunnel. So I say that to illustrate this larger problem, which is now manifest with actual proof that, just as you had said, that Hamas is using facilities that should be off limits, mosques, schools, hospitals. This Al-Shifa hospital, which is near the coastline. It's the largest hospital in Gaza. It's effectively out of fuel. Thousands of people have sought refuge in it, and Israel has been criticized heavily for conducting military operations in proximity to, or sometimes bombs hitting the hospital itself, and the women and the children being injured. But even to this day, Hamas terrorists have been viewed or videotaped going in and out of the facility, firing rocket-propelled grenades. The Israelis have tried to deliver fuel. Hamas will not allow hospital administrators to leave the hospital to retrieve the fuel and bring it back in. There's also video of people with white flags trying to leave the hospital through a particular gate, and then they are taken under fire. No Israelis were firing. It had to have been Hamas shooters, so we're trying to scare people back into the hospital to continue effectively to be used as hostages. So it's just a brutally cruel situation created by Hamas, the same group that continues to pledge more October 7th atrocities against Israel until all Jews are eliminated and the state of Israel is eliminated.
Is there, Dakota, I've got to ask you this, Dakota Wood from the Heritage Foundation joining us, foreign policy analyst. So do you think there is actually a possibility that Israel will be able to permanently take out Hamas in Gaza?
And probably not in that permanent sense. Just like the United States has destroyed Al-Qaeda, but there are still remnants. A huge global coalition destroyed Islamic State, but some of its remnants hang around. These groups also tend to change names. You can have still some of the senior leaders, and they ditch, the name Hamas, and they, adopt a different name, but still the same objectives. So I think Israel can eliminate it as an organized, equipped military threat of the type that it posed up to this point. To do that, but its ideology remains so long as the Palestinian people continue to support it. And this didn't spring out of nowhere, right? So they're in Gaza Strip. It took control of that area in 2006 or so, 2007. Israel had completely withdrawn from Gaza in 2005. Hamas has a fight with Islamic Jihad and with Palestinian Authority, won that fight, and has controlled that region. So it's lived there for almost 20 years. The Palestinian people in Gaza have supported it. They're members of it. The Hamas has used its churches, its mosques, and its schools, and its hospitals, etc. Right. Mm-hmm. So as long as it continues receiving support, it'll be around in some form, but not as the entity that conducted the October 7th attacks with thousands of terrorists.
We've seen, of course, Israel providing humanitarian zones, escapes for people, pathways to escape. And I haven't really seen that reported in the mainstream media at large. One of the things I find interesting about all of this is that it really, Dakota, only took a month before President Biden has been waffling, and now it seems like he is prodding for a ceasefire. The media are on Biden, some in the media on Biden to try to get Benjamin Netanyahu to have a ceasefire. Of course, we know that the Democrat Party is very much divided on this. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu, you think he is going to ultimately have a ceasefire? I know that he's paused, but he's under a lot of pressure now to come up with a ceasefire. Do you think he's actually going to break?
Well, I think no, but I think these words have squishy definitions on how they're used.
Yep.
What's the difference between a pause and a ceasefire? Technically, a ceasefire is the cessation, the stopping of all hostilities while negotiations continue. This pause is I'm going to stop firing for 4 hours in a particular area, create a safe corridor, and people leave. Well, now this pause, is it 4 hours? Is it 8 hours? Is it 3 days? Is it 5 days? I mean, all these numbers have been brought up. There is currently reports of negotiations between Israel and Hamas through other parties to establish like a 5-day pause period or a mini ceasefire for the exchange of prisoners or hostages. Hamas says Israel has lots of hostages, to include women and children. Israel clearly has said that Hamas has Israeli citizens, and they're looking to release maybe 50 or 60 of these people during this period of time. But both sides know that the longer a pause occurs, the more Hamas will exploit that to reposition its fighters, to create new booby traps and ambush sites, and to try to smuggle in somehow supplies for it to use, and this is what Israel feels. So public pressure is enormous to do something like this. Pictures of dead babies and children just rend everyone's heart, at least in the West. We have to remember that Hamas used babies as targets, right, to intentionally kill them. The deaths that are occurring in Gaza are incidental to the combat operations of Israel going against military targets, which are the Hamas terrorists. So there is a difference between the two sides, but the propaganda war and the pictures and the videos are just heartrending. And I think Netanyahu is under a lot of pressure, as you said, to at least have these pauses or temporary cessations. But I don't think that he'll buckle to a semi-permanent ceasefire for any extended period of time.
Dakota, a lot is being made of the cleanup of San Francisco. One of the big issues with San Francisco, of course, as you know, is homelessness and fentanyl addiction. Now, here you have President Xi Jinping from China, where a lot of the ingredients from fentanyl is they're manufactured. They go to Mexico, and they come across President Joe Biden's open border. So you have the two guys that, in my estimation, facilitate a lot of this fentanyl addiction going to San Francisco, a city that has been decimated by that addiction. And President Biden says he's going to speak to Xi Jinping about fentanyl. What do you see coming from AIPAC?
Nothing. I mean, they're not going to take a walk along feces-covered sidewalks or needle-strewn parks in San Francisco, right? So it's just ridiculous. It's like today, Iran chairing a Human Rights Commission subcommittee out of the United Nations, right? Iran chairing something like that. So to have this kind of a meeting between the two leaders when it doesn't appear any prep work has happened. We have to keep in mind that for decades, when you had the leaders of two countries to have a mini summit or a summit of some type, there are just weeks and months of work that goes into the two teams talking about what's going to come out of this. So for the president of the United States and the dictator tyrant dude, they're from China, to get together and not have some pre-planned script or series of pictures or agreement almost tells us everything we need to know. It's going to be the United States going kind of hat in hand, asking China for things, and China will come in with a hand wave, and we're not going to, accede to any of your requests because they aren't framed as demands, so we're not arguing from a position of strength. So, I mean, all the connectors that you just mentioned, open border, the free flow of people and fentanyl and all these other things, the precursor chemicals for fentanyl coming from China. China is the same place that shut down the supply of medical supplies during the whole COVID lockdown, masks and gloves and those sorts of things, and imprisoned its own people there. So I just don't think that anything substantive is going to come out of this. The White House will make a big deal about it. The Chinese will say it was a non-event, a nothing burger, or whatever the Chinese language is for that. But I think it's just another bad call on the part of Washington, D.C. White House that makes America look weak.
Let me ask you, because it's been a year since President Xi Jinping and Biden actually met, and it seems to me in the last year things have gotten worse, not better. And I mean, all you got to do is talk about the Chinese spy balloon that was allowed to fly across America. Yeah. So I'm kind of with you. It doesn't seem like things are getting better, and Biden clearly not respected on the world stage.
Well, China continues to militarize these islands, that have been a feature now for several years, right? Heavily weaponized. They use their ships and boats to ram the ships and boats of other countries like Malaysia and Vietnam and the Philippines. Continue to, threaten and prod at Taiwan militarily. They practiced, tactics that would lay siege to that island. Dangerously close intercepts to U.S. aircraft and the aircraft of others, like the Brits and the Australians flying in international airspace. It's an example of the type that we also see in the Middle East, where the United States tries to talk through these things. That is viewed as weakness, and our adversaries exploit that weakness. They press their advantage. Anytime you've got a situation where there's a bully, if somebody approaches the bully and says, hey, can't we talk this out? Can't we reason this out? The bully bullies even more, right? I mean, they press their advantage militarily and with a great deal of muscularity. And the White House just doesn't seem to understand that. So one of the objectives, presumably or reportedly, is the reestablishment of military ties between the Pentagon and their Chinese counterparts. A lot of that has been cut off. I don't think that that's really going to happen. The United States has even extended an invitation to Chinese and Russian officials to come visit a nuclear testing site in the United States. Well, where's the reciprocity there? Why would you want to invite your two chief enemies, to visit such a sensitive site when Russia and China have been behaving as they have? So I think it's just a very weak hand that will be taken full advantage of by Xi Jinping.
Real quickly, Dakota Wood from the Heritage Foundation. Headline, Ukrainian military officer coordinated the Nord Stream pipeline attack. The attack of the Nord Stream pipeline was something you and I spoke about at great length back when it happened. Now they're saying that it was indeed Ukraine that was behind the attack. You surprised?
Well, we don't really know that. I mean, it's a Washington Post story that AP and other news services have picked up on. They cite a particular individual, a semi-senior Ukrainian officer in their intelligence community and working with their special operations. The report says he helped to coordinate the rental of a sailboat. Special operations guys go out there. They have deep-sea diving equipment, and they go something like 200 feet or so underwater to place charges around this pipeline, and all this happened about a year ago. But the report cites anonymous sources. Ukraine isn't saying anything about it, and so I'm just not sure the truthfulness, the veracity of this particular reporting. Sweden and Denmark both did extensive investigations. Sweden completed theirs and refused to share its findings with the international community. So what's up with that, right? And so I'm aware of the report. Without some kind of corroborating evidence, I don't know what the truthfulness of it is, and so it's just going to continue to be a mystery, I think, for a while.